Welcome, this is a silhouette environment video, and here's a reference sheet that I put together just to familiarize myself with the shapes. Now you can go into this without really looking at your reference, and here I'm trying to take this shape and make it a little bit more interesting, and I'm doing that with thick to thin to help move the eye upwards, allowing me to create a focal point near the top, and trying to carve into it, separate some elements so that it starts making it into a more complex and interesting shape. Here I'm adding a floating piece to make the shape more interesting, and also analyzing like where my big shapes are, where's my medium shape, and my small shape. Then I realized there's too many floating shapes, and we get rid of those and try to add some asymmetry from maybe these hanging pieces from the corners. Down here, this area is very square and simple, so adding in some soft curves. Also, I like to have the curves kind of taper so that it imply direction. If it's a rectangle, it doesn't do that. This is a complete square with hard angles. Adding in some curves, it's going to help make it a more interesting shape. Hard angles and soft curves, they complement each other. So now that we've analyzed this, we can try to bring that into our silhouette on left, starting with the top, just carving out into that simple diamond shape, and looking at the area down here and see if we can also incorporate some sort of either concave or convex shapes in here to make it a little bit more complex. So we're gonna take a look at the shape that we started with and the shape that we have now. We've added hierarchy, big, medium, small, floating shapes, hard angles, and soft curves. The only thing missing is possibly a shape cutout, but we can do that after. And looking at our reference, a lot of these shapes that are happening in the reference are just triangular shapes. This chimney is interesting because it's tapering. This area in particular, I would add more curves, and even the pillars can have a couple. So yeah, very angular, a lot of hard angles. So incorporating some curves is going to make that a little bit more interesting. And something that I liked was that the environment moved over to one side in that reference, and I kind of took that, also left a space underneath it, like a gap, like it was kind of lifted from the ground. And here I'm cutting out the negative shape out of the silhouette. It doesn't necessarily need to be a piece that is going to be missing from your environment. It could be just like a window with fire behind it. Here I started using the lasso tool to create long, thin shapes that come out and end in hard angles. And that's one way to add in hard angles to these curves, by having them be at the ends. And something I like to do is sometimes take my asymmetrical environment and mirror it just to see the elements and what they would look like if it was symmetrical. After seeing it like this, it makes me want to add an element on the left hand side of the structure. And that'll help with hierarchy, with having the silhouette be divided so that there's a big, medium, and small component to it. Big in the middle, medium on the right, small on the left. And with the door shape, I'm just trying to avoid a simple or rectangular shape and drawing it in as a negative shape, even though that area is not going to be cut out. But it would be pretty cool if there was this kind of gap underneath the building. Here I'm carrying over that element where the building is kind of suspended from the ground. With a different value, you can add shapes and like a silhouette shape to your roof. Even that little bit of taper at the top I think helps out here. And there could even be like a second little roof over the entrance, over that arc. Here the triangle shapes, we're still looking too simple, so I started carving them out, adding in some tapered curves, and maybe pulling down this diamond shape at the top. Here I'm now thinking about adding some windows with maybe triangular sharp shapes near the top. The triangle eraser is really good at creating these because you just pull up and then you could sharpen the top of the window shape. Now we're going to our first silhouette and seeing if we can adjust the roof shape to add a little bit more flair to our first silhouette. Also cutting out a window shape, maybe there could be some sort of light source here. And this is the part where it started to look like a bear wearing a tie, so I kind of went back over this. But I was also thinking about the crystal and how it could be a power source or something of cultural importance to this, or to the people of the town. And then also trying to incorporate some big, medium, small elements around the main structure. And here, instead of putting on the side, I took the gray value and placed it over where the window opening was. Now I'm looking for some asymmetrical element, and I think stairs will be really helpful here. So we're just gonna add them in here on the side and maybe indicate some steps, but not have to go into full detail. Here I applied the gray behind the window to have the door shape, and thinking about my options for this crystal, we can have it tied, we can have it floating, we can, it could be ropes instead of chains, all these different components. Also, it could be a light source or the torch by the window. It could be some sort of really bright smoke. Just exploring some possible options for the light value. And you can create a shape by itself and adjust its hard angles and soft curves. And you could even draw on the sides to see where all those are. And then using the transform tool, you can move them onto your silhouette to make it interesting, change the value if you're not able to see it over black. And here I just happened to notice that the bull horns are represented here. Probably subconsciously I did that, but either way, this works for just about any sort of interesting shape that you want to infuse into your silhouette. After that, I was trying to add some sort of element that is maybe not connected, but I ended up going with a bridge to help serve as a second element in our big, medium, small, the medium one. Here I'm also taking the simple shape that we had before that was a triangle and adding some curves into it. And some ideas that are popping up for me for this door, since it has this bullhorn-like shape, could be like there could be a bull spirit that protects this specific structure, and maybe it's tied to the culture of the people that live here. I'm noticing that the top and the bottom of the main structure is a little divided right in the middle, so I'm gonna add some elements to the roof and try to make some of those shapes up there interesting, and maybe also use the roof shape to push the bottom part up a little bit. And we can always transform them to change the scaling up. Here I'm exploring different door shapes and possibly having a high contrast area here. Then I started to realize a darker door will work better because I'll be able to make the spirit kind of glow and a little lighter. Maybe the face is more ghostly or spirit-like, and as it goes towards the horns, it's a little bit more solid. Here I just briefly went back to the reference to take a look at how square and rectangular the head shape was, with the eyes being more on the side. You don't really need to do this to correct shapes or anything. It might slow you down, but if you want to really nail the shape, then it's not a bad idea to look back at your reference image. Now there's some things that I think about when I think about making an interesting shape. The first one is big, medium, small. Second is asymmetry. Third is hard angles and soft curves to complement each other. After this, it's thick to thin, so that your shapes kind of create a direction and flow through them. And lastly, floating shapes or shapes cut out. You can lighten your shapes up or add visual interest on the inside. Something else that I also think about is dividing my shapes down the middle or horizontally, but just making sure that they're asymmetrical in at least one of those options. I especially do this for doors sometimes. Or also trying to think of elements that could be added to the door that'll push it out of that symmetrical space into asymmetry. Here I'm thinking a window or maybe a bright symbol on the dark door. You can also look at some of the interesting shapes that you have going on in the rest of your scene and choose to repeat them, but alter them a little bit so that it's a little refreshing to look at something familiar but also have a new element to it. I ended up going with a wider door and repeated some diamond shape cutout. And that's it for the video. I hope these tips help you with incorporating interesting shapes to your environments. And if you get stuck, please send me a message.